seconds. 29.
28 seconds.
27.
26.
25 seconds.
24. 23.
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
20 seconds.
19.
18.
17 seconds.
16.
15 seconds.
14.
13 seconds.
12.
11.
10 seconds. 9.
8.
7.
6.
6 what?
Copy.
5 seconds.
3. 2. 1.
Hi folks, and welcome back to the Scotch Tracker. Today we'll be discussing Star Trek the Animated Series with Adam Harvey and Rich Schepis, the authors of the book Star Trek, the official guide to the animated series. Welcome Adam and Rich, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So, to begin with, what were your earliest memories of having seen the original animated series of Star Trek?
You want to start, Rich?
Sure. I was a kid. I saw it Saturday mornings when it was live. You know, I just remember seeing the show, but I mean, the animated series was like the first live one I got to see, which is pretty cool. And I just loved hearing the actual voice actors in the roles. Yeah.
It was the same thing for me. It was the first live action Star Trek I saw, but it was also as a younger person at that point, it was a little confusing sometimes because it would come on and you as a kid you don't really understand how television is scheduled and like why aren't cartoons on at 8 o'clock at night or whatever, you know. So when it would come on, I wasn't sure if it was the live action or animated series, and the introduction isn't as clear to a small child, I think, as you could think, because it's very similar to TOS. So I'd often tune it in, and it would be whatever it was. I was hoping that it wasn't. So it's like, oh, it's the animated one, you know. It's like, where's the live action version? Or oh, it's the live action one. Why isn't it animated? So yeah, that was early on. I remember getting them confused as far as like when they were running.
How well do you think the animated series stands up compared to the other Star Trek shows?
Good, Aaron.
That one, it's funny. Like we're so deep into the lore and the how it was made and everything. It's hard for me to be objective, I think, in some ways. But looking back and taking in the whole entirety of Star Trek, I think it is a really good bridge point between the original series and the things that came later. There's a lot of things that happened in TAS that set the stage for things later, like the holodeck, and you've got a lot of Spock's backstory, which ended up even in the Kelvin universe. So I think it's an important touchstone between the two series, and it kept it alive in public consciousness too.
I think it's honestly, I feel like it's season 4 of the original series. Same writers, same voice cast, same kind of stories. You know, when we did the book and, you know, we started going through each episode and analyzing everything, I really begun to appreciate it again. You know, as I've gotten older and it's released on home video, you binge it, and it's not really bingeable.
Not meant to be binged. No.
No. And I appreciate it more watching it episode by episode and thinking about how it stood up to the original series stories. And you know, quite frankly, they're just as strong, in my opinion. They focus on the same kind of ideas, character relationships. You know, you still had that, and I also think it was interesting because a lot of those episodes are probably better than season 3 Star Trek if you think about it, the original series. So it's nice to see the show receive its proper due. You know, it's a shame. It's a shame some of the people weren't around to enjoy it, but luckily Dorothy got to see this, and you know that was one of the big ones for us.
So, like I was wondering, like basically, like what are some of your favorite episodes from the animated series?
Oh, you want to go, Rich, or you want me to go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, obviously, Yesteryear is like one of our.
We self-select that out when we talk about our favorites. We're like, obviously Yesteryear, so we'll just move that aside. And of the others,
it's crazy. I mean, I really do like so many of them. Magic's Omegas too. I just love that whole idea of when they did the story, it's you can't have a God, but you can have the devil. And I love the idea that it's classic Star Trek. Lucian's not the devil, and then we're made to think he's the devil because of the way he appeared. If you pay attention to the story, and I just love that idea. And the counterclock incident is another one that's really one of my favorites. Fred Bronson did an awesome job with that episode. He really tackled ageism, which I just thought, and that the whole idea of not having regrets in your life. They were really two standouts, and even how they treated women in that episode, and the Lorelei signal.
Although Fred did say he would have actually given Dr. April just a little bit of more of a choice in that decision to yes, we should become younger, or no, we should stay the same age. So,
and still it's common.
It was still 1973.
If I remember correctly, Fred wasn't sure which way he was going to go, if he was going to have him be younger, decide, and so obviously it was an editorial decision, and at that point it wasn't who was the second season director? Now I'm forgetting who it was.
Bill Reid.
Bill Reid. So obviously Bill Reid probably had a little bit of an input, because I don't think Dorothy was really around that season, those last 6 episodes. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick just one, but there's some of my favorites.
I think for me, one of the ones that I really, really like, because it feels so TOS, very, very Star Trek for the time, was One of Our Planets is Missing. Just because there's an ethical dilemma, there's this giant monster, basically, essentially, headed towards a planet, and, the reaction from the crew and other people is we've got to destroy this thing because it's going to kill all these people. And they learn how to communicate with it. And not only that, everybody on the crew has something to do. You see, Uhura has created the connection that allows Spock to talk with the cloud. Scotty is getting antimatter pieces from inside the body of the cloud so they can run the ship. And it's also the first time we see the inside of a nacelle. There's a bit of a cut scene that we don't see, but you kind of see part of it with the way it's been animated, is that they took a turbo shaft ride up the strut of the nacelle into that. And so we never got that transition. But if you see at the very end, when they head back to the other side, there's the handle for the turbo lift. So they're actually going back into the lift to go back down. So that's my Starship fun. I love that's the stuff I love about that. But yeah, to me that just felt like the quintessential Star Trek episode. And we had a flashback to a character from what was it? Where they had all the war games.
The Ultimate Computer?
Yes. One of the captains has decided to retire and become a mayor, basically, on a planet. And oops, that planet's now in the way of a giant monster. But I think my other favorite is the time trap, because we get to see all these crazy ships and aliens that have been all stuck together. And it's another kind of a Star Trek trope of the people who were once enemies are together cooperating. Even in the Klingons and Enterprise sort of cooperate. They were still going to try and blow it up, but didn't go right. And we got to see the Bonaventure, which has become sort of my favorite hard luck ship, the ship that nobody likes. I guess it's sort of almost a metaphor for the animated series inside of the animated series. It's the clunky old ship that people are like, ugh, that's not great. But there's something really interesting to it, and getting a chance to talk to the person who created it and why it was done the way it was done was really interesting. So I think that just being able to know where all of those ships came from, they were versions of the first ship from the first episode, because Gene wasn't very specific with his direction, and so they just created version after version, and they didn't throw them away. So when it came time when they needed all of these extra ships in this graveyard, they just grabbed all the stuff that they had drawn before, and they had really detailed ships. So yeah, so those are kind of my two favorites. I love that
story with Bob. That he kept drawing, and then they kept sending it to Gene. Gene's like, nah, that's not what I want, but never anything else specific. So
yeah,
derelict ship, more Federation ships,
Yeah. And in our book, we actually have one of the earlier ones, that like NCC 501 or something like that, some sort of cargo shuttle. It has this big kind of rounded bottom and stuff like that. It's really interesting. I think that he did a really good job with the ships, and in fact, I think Mike Okuda's one of his favorite ships from that era is the Antares shuttle, or no, cargo ship, and so I love the fact that Bob created like Mike Okuda's favorite ship. So that's kind of fun.
Cool. So it's one of our viewers, Stephen Fadri, mentioned love of the Slayer weapon.
Yeah, Slayer weapon's a great one. I mean, that's a real interesting one because that's the only TOS story that doesn't include Kirk. You know, I just thought that was a really awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and Larry brings in his Kazinti, you know, which is a really cool idea.
It's like a crossover universe, like way back then. It's like kind of crazy.
You know, the other interesting thing is, you know, a lot of the color issues that are paraded out there, you know, come to a head with that episode. And the funny thing is when we were talking to Larry, because he said Dorothy apologized, and he's like, well, that's the color on the planet, so I mean that made sense, which is
if you listen to like I read the book, what is it, the Man Kazin War, I think it was, I can't remember exactly the whatever it came out around that time, they describe the ship as pink. Like, so there's just like in his actual stuff before the animated series, they were colored properly. So I feel like that whoever was behind this, which is probably Bob or one of the other designers, are all science fiction fans. They were in the Navy or the Air Force or whatever, and so that was just their thing. I imagine they've read that book. So when this happened, they just went back and looked at that for resources, because they were, as much as like the kind of knocks that the animated series gets in Filmation in general, they really were trying to do some great stuff and on a very, very short timeline. So, you know, we're looking at it with 50 or 45 years of future animation, and it's not really fair to compare them that way. Like, but if you look at what other shows were doing, you don't see like that same looping background as they're running. You know, they have a big background that's been painted, and I've actually recently been doing some research on industry magazines, and people were praising how that looked at the time, which I thought was great. It's like these amazingly artistic painted backgrounds. So, you know, definitely better than I think that people give it credit for.
So I wondered, like, the book that you guys have written, basically, the official guide. I wondered basically, like, how did that come about?
Do you want to take that, Rich?
Yeah. Aaron and I, you know, both worked on Trek movie, and you know, we always discuss things, but we never really partnered on anything. And you know, I got to a point where I was like, I didn't want to write for free anymore. You know, if you're good at something, you should be paid for it. And I was thinking, all right, what's a marketable idea in the Star Trek universe? Because, you know, I love Trek, and it dawned on me that, well, the only TOS property they haven't really mined was the animated series. And, you know, I went to Aaron because, you know, Aaron was an expert. You know, he did the Saturday morning podcast, and he was all in on it. You know, and I remember watching it, and I was like, yo, we should do a book. And
well, I did the podcast because it was sort of, that's what's left that nobody's really explored. So I'm like, okay, I'll dive into this. It wasn't necessarily my first choice, but it became a passion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It was very much a passion for both of us, and it was, you know, it was a really interesting process. It's the first time we both collaborated with anybody, and I grew a lot from that whole experience. And, you know, and I still sing Aaron's praises. That book doesn't work if it's not for his layouts, his design. And just, you know, if you take a look at the care, you know, the triple pages, the triples keep going up and, you know, increasing in number. And even the computer data bank, how it changes colors for each episode.
And nobody's ever figured out that those colors actually are a code. Like, if you can place the colors with a letter, or roughly, you'll get some words out of it. But I don't think anybody's ever stumbled across that.
We got really lucky, though. I mean, you know, it was the first professional book either one of us ever pitched. We had, you know, Mike Johnson, who wrote the comics. was invaluable. He actually pitched the book to CBS before we even got the physical pitch to him. It was pretty funny because we just asked him for his opinion, and he's like, "I want to buy this book." So I think he must have been in John's office every day going, "Oh." So he looked at our pitch and he actually delivered it. And I guess within an hour, John said, "Yeah, we like it." And then he's like, "Okay, it might take up to a year. Could take 10 years to get printed. So don't worry about it.
We'll call you. Don't call us. Just sit back now and wait."
And we got lucky. Kevin Toyama from Well to Know and called Riza over at CBS, and it's like, "All right, what are you having for Star Trek?" And understandably, they were pushing a lot of the Discovery stuff, but for some reason, it wasn't doing it for him. And he says, "Well, what else do you have?" And she said, "The animated series." And he's like, "That's it. That's what I want."
Well, they did Peanuts, and they've done other animated type things there too. So
so it was really awesome. I was really disappointed because I think they were sold like twice while we were waiting for the contract to be officially signed.
Yeah.
And
we sort of lost some time.
And remember when they finally signed the contract and we had that big 2-hour conference call with Kevin, and at the end of the call, and Aaron and I are excited to work with him because he's excited about the book, and he
could be as nerdy with it as we were because he was as a big fan of Star Trek the animated series as we were.
Yeah. He was awesome, and he lets us know at the end of the call that he's been let go, downsizing.
Sorry, they've sold the company, and I'm out now. We're like, what?
So it was sort of it was.
And
sad.
He gave us like the best line when we kind of learned that we were actually going forward with this. He's like, "Congratulations, you're doing a book. Also, condolences, you're doing a book." Because as fun as it was, there's also, Rich and I had some probably just knockdown drag just between us because of everything that it's a super stressful process, and you have deadlines that you can't miss, and life happens still, and
and we're doing it across the country. I'm on the East Coast, Aaron's on the West Coast, so we've never.
And we're also designing it and doing the cover. That's something that this is kind of weirdly unheard of. Apparently, that anybody has done everything. Like normally, you have an artist or somebody else. They still collaborate, but not to this level. And I think if I did another book, I would try and maybe make each section a little bit more standard because they all look relatively the same, but programmatically they are different. Their layout's slightly different. And if you have an entire book of 166 pages with slightly different layout, it takes a lot longer than you would if it was just duplicate it for chapter.
Aaron decided he needed to challenge himself and torture himself in the same process. So, although honestly,
well, we never knew if we were ever going to see another animated series book. There was no other animated series at the time. Even there was one Star Trek animated series.
Yeah, the other interesting thing about our pitch was, which evidently doesn't happen either. Usually, it's just like written on a piece of white paper. We actually presented how we thought the book should lay out. That cover that Aaron did is basically the cover.
Pretty much this. Yeah.
And they let us make the book we wanted to make. So that was pretty cool. We made some obviously changes as we built it out. But we
had a much more kind of encyclopedic. I can't remember. We had an encyclopedic.
We had to tweak it a little bit. It was because of the page count. But it was awesome. The funny thing was we only pitched 120 pages because we don't know. And Kevin's like, "Can you make it 160?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, sure.
We'll make it 360 if you want." It's like
whatever you want.
So much artwork. Yeah. And if it wasn't for Bob Klein, who was one of the key illustrators and storyboard artists on that, we would not have had a book nearly as beautiful. There were a few episodes that he didn't have artwork for, which is we figured out some tricks around that, but it was the amount of stuff that we have is incredible. There's so much unused artwork that we have that we could do another book of just the concept sketches of the animated series.
I would be remiss too not to give a huge shout out to Fred Bronson because he was the publicist on the show.
Yes.
He loved Star Trek, and he was the publicist for NBC at the time. So he's sending all these press releases out. And magazines and newspapers, they're not running an animated series, Saturday morning cartoon
press releases or quotes.
So
in 1973, at least.
In 1973. So most of what he gave us had probably never seen the light of day. So we were able to use a lot of quotes, from people that had passed on. Gene, Magil,
Mate Jeffries.
Matt Jeffries. There was some really great stuff in there, and Margaret Arman and Nichelle Nichols, because we weren't able to track down voice talent from the show. That was probably my biggest regret. I think our biggest regret was, we were told we were going to have to pay for some of them. We were a little worried, just about as they were getting up there, what they would recall. So we just made the decision that we're going to have to go with what we have, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, we did have like a story that I did get to speak with Nichelle at one point. So we had the conversation that we had about the animated series. This was a few years ago when she was doing Renegades. So she was still sort of out there. Now I think she's there's like one more last bash that she's doing this year, and then that's it, which would have been last year had COVID not happened.
The funny thing is we have more from Walter, who didn't appear in the show.
Yeah, that's great.
The writing he did for Infinite Vulcan. So I mean,
I've interviewed him a couple times, so that's really funny.
That was funny.
Yeah. But no, Nichelle said, she goes, I'll tell you a little secret. It's like, I have been trying to get back into that chair since that episode. So the idea that she just wanted to get back into command. And so it was a great quote, and it was just, you could tell that she had a real fondness for that specific episode. And we have quotes from David Gerald, who actually was there when that happened, where, she basically shouted, hooray, because she was finally got to do something in command.
David gave her the voice of God in Bem, and she loved that. And it's a great George Wallace story that goes along with that one. So I love that, David's recollection. David was so fun to interview. He was probably the biggest name that we got to interview for the book. And he was so gracious with his time.
Dorothy.
Dorothy, yeah. But we didn't get to actually talk to Dorothy. We just had some questions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but
I had spoken to her before, I guess, so in my brain it just sort of connected.
Yeah. So that's pretty much how the book happened. It was lightning in a bottle. It doesn't happen that way.
Just that, I had set an alarm, like, contact CBS in like 6 months or whatever, just to see. And like literally, what was it, a week later? Less than a week? I don't know. It was some incredibly short period of time. And they're like, "Hi, this never happens."
By I think like October we heard from Kevin, and then by December, I think right around the Christmas holiday, they said, "All right, we want to make the book with you." It took about another 6 to 8 months to get the contract.
Then we're just going to let the contract sit on somebody's desk, and
we weren't allowed to. We weren't allowed to start, so we actually sadly lost a couple people.
We really should have started.
Yeah,
looking back now,
hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah.
We probably should have.
Well, part of it is that they weren't sure how they were going to do the advertising and the press around it, so they didn't want to get it out that the book was happening. And unfortunately, Weldon Owen did that themselves. So
and I guess that was part of the transition, being sold twice, and it just seemed like a lot of things started to get by the wayside, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So how long would you say like the book took to write in total?
Well, I think Aaron had the hardest part because designing each page intricately like he did. I mean, the manuscript. And I'm a pretty quick writer, so I'm fortunate. I've been writing my entire career, even though not a book. I can kick out copy pretty fast. So
was it like 3 or 4 months maybe?
I got bronchitis. Yeah, it was only. When we got the contract signed and we got to go ahead from Weldon Owen, from our new editor, it was September. The manuscript was turned in by December, and then I think the book was signed was like March because it had to go overseas to be printed. So in order to have it printed by the fall for the holiday,
for Comic-Con or for Star Trek Las Vegas.
Yeah, Star Trek Vegas, which they still. Yeah. I think they only had a few hundred copies, and
I think that we had hoped that they would have brought more, but I think they honestly probably didn't have more. I think they gave us what they had at the time.
And it sold right out. So we were excited about that because we knew there was an audience. And it's definitely a niche. And we're very excited about how well received it's been. Extremely well received. It's very flattering, very humbling to hear people, especially professionals, that you respect and you read their work and they're saying, "Oh, I love this book," and it's like, wow, that's a pretty cool thing. It's sort of nice to hear. I don't know if I consider them my peers, but I guess they are in a way. So it's like and Aaron and I, for what it is, we were able to contribute even a small portion to the legacy of this wonderful franchise this wonderful idea that, was born out of Gene Roddenberry's head. It's amazing.
And filled in with so many other people.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, and then that collaborative process that started. We were so lucky, and it's you just seeing the people that have the passion for it, and you can see that the people that have the real passion for it. Wow, look at Lower Decks. Look what Mike McMahon's doing. That's it's so much fun. Sometimes people
and they have referenced TAS, which is great. That
it's
also not just like, well, we're going to forget that. It's been woven into it.
And I know a lot of times people want to compare them, and they're really apples and oranges. Two different shows. But I mean, my goodness, look what he's doing. It's just, it's phenomenal. I enjoy that show very much. And then you get Riker doing his jazz riff. Come on. How awesome is that?
That's in your countdown even. That was great.
I know. I love it.
8.
So,
that was...
another question I was wondering, basically, if you've got like a favorite part of the book. Rich, you spoke about like the tribbles and the... there was a couple of sections.
Yeah, for me, it's the weird. The writing portion for me is like, I'm happy it went well, but I don't really look at it. I look at what Aaron did, and I mean, every time I've had a chance to talk about the book, I mean, it's a no-brainer to me. The book doesn't work without Aaron, and it's not just that Aaron's a designer, but Aaron's passion. He talked about how arduous his process was and how much work he put into it, and we had phone calls, and but honestly it doesn't work. The design, the layout that he put in there, I
think keeping each other honest is what, like, there were times where it's just like, okay, this isn't 100% verified, but we're 90% sure this person did this voice, and Rich is like, no, we're not putting it in. If we don't know 100%, it's not going in there. It's like, but we saw it online. No, it's not online. We're not, until we can verify it twice, you're not putting it in the book. So
that's my journalistic background. It drives me crazy,
and it worked. I mean, it was like, there's just that time though when you're like, as the fan part of me conflicted sometimes with the professional bookmaking part of me.
Yeah, and it would have been so easy just to let that go and just say, okay. But I felt it was really important to verify as much as we could. I mean, obviously, it was a 45-year-old property. Even talking to Bob and Fred and David and Bill Simpson and all these other, Larry Niven, how much do they actually remember from that time period?
We still have never been able to verify how many times that they recorded together.
Yeah,
and what those were like.
Yeah, it looks like it was just 3 times. I think that's what we ended up being able to say. I think Fred Bronson helped us out with that. But there's a lot. We don't know exactly every time. Shatner, where was he? I mean, I think one of the captains,
New York once, I think,
sounded like it was recorded. I think somebody said in the bathroom. So on a cassette recorder, and he would just send
Filmation
it
did mail them cassette recorders. That part I do remember. Like,
yeah,
some people would be doing like stage plays, and so they're like, "Well, we can't get in, so here, record this."
Yeah, so I meant Nimoy and Shatner were all over the country doing things, but was George and Nichelle and Majel and Jimmy all in the same room when they were recording? We just don't know. But
or did they even? Well, yeah, they must have came into the studio and like most.
I loved the Deep Space Nine documentary, the beginning of the documentary, where Andrew Robinson talks about the lens of your memory, and this is the truth as we remember it today. And I felt like, it would have been a great opportunity to put that in the book, because a lot of times Star Trek fans will keep you honest, and Star Trek fans will let you know if you make a mistake. And a lot of times there's a lot of urban legends around the animated series that was one of the reasons we were very specific about making sure that we had the correct information, because we knew we wanted to stand up to fan scrutiny, and the fans deserve that. I mean, as a fan, I would have bought this book if somebody else made it, and I would expect as much as well. We didn't want to just throw out theories and our own ideas and say, oh, we think it was this. That's not what we were doing. We were giving you the definitive history of the book, the official guide,
as we know it at that time, because
we
are definitely open to like, new information, because you can't. It's basically scientific in that sense too. It's just like you don't want to just push things for so long. The idea of the color of pink and green, like that was because Hal Sutherland was colorblind. Well, he was colorblind, not to that bad of a degree.
And he didn't do the colors.
But he wasn't the one who chose that. Even though he was an art director, there is a specific person that did coloring, and his name was Irv Kaplan, and he had just a very interesting sense of color, which now, if you think about it, had it been a normal color scheme, it would not maybe have been as memorable, honestly. But, you know, my theory when we first went into it, which kind of bore out, was if he was colorblind, okay, 1973, the show didn't work. Somebody by some point would have told him, hey, these are not right. It wouldn't have continued into 1980s with like He-Man having pink shorts, and like none of that would have continued. Somebody somewhere would have called them out on that. But it was a stylistic choice by somebody who apparently was kind of crabby, apparently. So,
Bob said that Irv would sit in his office, right, and just paint them by himself. You know, he would like hide in his office with the door closed and just paint the cells, which I thought was awesome too.
So yeah, so he was the one who set the tone for it. But so that sort of story, like, you know, had we just replicated what we had heard, we wouldn't have even bothered to research that. But we wanted to like take anything that was, well, everybody keeps saying this. Is this actually true? Does this make sense? And then speaking with, you know, people behind the scenes, it was fascinating, honestly. In fact, that's one of my favorite parts of the book. This is kind of a tangent. We were talking about that before. The fascinating, and you said what, the stuff that Rich had come up with, the idea of taking some of the things that we had left over that were like, this are fun, but we don't really know where to put it. So we basically created kind of like the equivalent of VH1's pop-up video, you know, kind of like in print form. So
yeah, I like those pop-up boxes, and picking the quotes wasn't always easy for us, but we tried to do we tried to do, you know, specific ones that were fun. You know, I was just thinking something too about the blindness. You know, the funny thing is that Dorothy Fontana was convinced it was Christensen that was colorblind, and that was the reason the colors were. Right. So we even get the differing points of view, but you sort of lean towards Bob because he was really in the trenches, and Dorothy even admitted the writers and the editors and the animators didn't really collaborate or.
It's a very different creative background than it is in the 21st century, where the idea of collaboration and everybody needing to know what everybody else is doing is sort of a mainstay of any kind of creative production, within reason, you know. But back then, everybody was in their lane. It's like if you were a colorist, you got the cell from the person who handed it off to you, and then you handed it to your boss. You didn't ever get up and talk with somebody else. If you had to talk with somebody, there was like a chain of memos. And that's one of the reasons Star Trek has so many printed documents of early, you know, TOS and TAS, is because everything had to go through a memo form if you wanted to talk with somebody, which is probably why a lot more stuff in the future is less concrete, because, you know, you don't end up having to do that when you get to like Voyager at that point. I mean, there are memos, but not...
I think a lot of that had to do with Gene and Dorothy too. I mean, you know, especially, you know, they were both so heavily involved in that first season. Even TNG, you can see his input.
So was there anything in particular that basically like surprised you while you were writing the book? Because thinking back, I think you like discovered like I remember listening to Saturday Morning Jack and stuff and seeing like that story was not quite right about the color blindness. So I thought later on.
I don't know. You had mentioned something before, Rich. Now I can't remember what it was that surprised you. Besides, I mean, the color, that was kind of the big one. But I think the fact that people, just the idea of the recording, that they weren't really together most of the time, or the fact that Billy Simpson, actually, his test recording is what they used. They had him in, they called him in, and said, okay, here, read these lines. He's, 7 at that time or something? He was very young. Trying to read them as if he's Spock as a kid and doing this, and it's very awkward. And then they're like, okay, great, we'll call you back. They call him back and say, yep, you got it. I'm like, great, when do we come into the studio to record? Oh, no, we're just going to use what you recorded. So the stuff that was used is just this first take, but it works because he's sort of awkward, and it seems to fit the character.
It's funny because when we interviewed him, you know, he's like, well, you know, I just read the lines, you know, and they would give me some direction while I was reading the lines during the audition, because I thought it was his performance really makes the episode, because, you know, it's not really focused on Leonard Nimoy's Spock. It's focused on William Simpson's Spock. and that growth in the character is William Simpson's responsibility in the episode. And for his, I don't know, for his unpolished or unrefined as his performance he thought it was, I thought it was perfect, man. I thought,
there's an emphasis on one word that he still dwells on. It's funny, like somebody like from 1973 when you were 7 years old, this is still in your head, that he said something and he put the emphasis on the wrong word or whatever, and so that still to him rings weird. And it's like I don't think noticed it until he pointed it out. I'm like, oh yeah, that.
I think they made the rest of the cast change the pronunciation so that
yes, that was the other, the Saylot. The Saylot was not pronounced.
Ichaya, right?
Ichaya. Yeah, sorry. And Dorothy was still bitter about that the last time we talked with her. I think my version was much more beautiful. It's like, okay. Because she did write it. I mean, I guess I would feel that same way too. It's sort of like, oh, some annoying kid just said it wrong, so now we have to say it like that.
As for me, for surprises from the book, it's as far as information that came out. I like the idea that David Gerrold, he talked about growing as a writer and producer, and understanding the way women were treated in science fiction. You don't often get to see that kind of reflection by professionals, and you'd almost think in Star Trek that's what you'd automatically have, because I put it in my letter about how he said it's important to walk the walk, and that while that wasn't surprising to me, it was surprising to me that how deliberate he was afterwards. He really pushed Nichelle Nichols. He wanted her to be focused on, and she's part of the bridge crew. I just love. I always say this. A lot of times people will take today's sensibilities and look at what happened in the past through this lens. And you've got to remember the landscape at the time. I always have this argument with our good friend Lori, and she copy edited the book for us. We were very fortunate. She actually stepped in a couple of times when Aaron and I were like, she was instrumental.
Actually, the book is also a chunk of her too, just because she sort of helped guide the
style,
the melding of the two, the style. Yeah, exactly.
She helped us get it coherent. But the character of Helen Noel, who I've just always loved. I mean, Marianne Hill is just beautiful, and I just love the way the character works and her facial expressions during it. Was she still a damsel in distress in part of the episode? Yes, definitely. That was what the landscape was. But she was also a scientist. She was an officer. She was selected for the mission because it was her expertise. She actually saves the day. And so I always, look at it and want to congratulate the fact that the writers were able to do that in the 1960s in the landscape of television. And then I say Uhura. And I know that a lot of people, especially today, she should have had more to do. She should have, I get it. I don't think people appreciate, and obviously the three of us are white guys, so how much can we appreciate it? But there was an African-American woman on the bridge at all times. She was a part of that command crew. She was qualified, and they never had to point it out. I watched the Squire Gothlas again last night, and there's a line where Trelane meets the Nubian princess, and he said, "No doubt taken on one of your raids." And it was interesting because Kirk just said, "No doubt." Like, he just blew it off. He didn't need to explain. She was a member of the crew. She's a member of the crew. You don't need to explain it. I'm very naive because I wish that we were living in that time where we don't have to label, and I get it. But it's like that idealism, is amazing. I wish that instead of promoting, these different characters, these diverse characters, they would just have them. I get it. I get why they have to do it. But it's like, it's that idea of we're all the same. We're all human beings. But again, maybe it's that, I'm white. I'm a white privilege. I'm a white guy. So what do I really understand about it? I don't know.
And just looking at Uhura in the lens of the cartoon in that era, if you look at other cartoons that played at the same time, both Uhura and Sulu were competent, what they were doing, they were just there. They were, but you had some pretty horrible racial stereotypes on other cartoons. You had Hong Kong Phooey. You had just basically you would not have seen the African American character in another cartoon necessarily be the scientist who can go rewire the bridge and connect it to Spock's brain, or well, that sounds horrible, or yes, exactly,
even
or
Fat Albert.
take over the ship. Yeah, the Fat Albert, which is from
I
the
mean,
same
that wasn't
company, and
completely. Yeah, that was definitely stereotypical. You know what? Aaron just hit something. That was the one thing that surprised me. They weren't going to hire Nichelle and George, and Leonard said, "Where are they? They're Star Trek." And drew a line in the sand and says, "I'm not doing it." I thought that was amazing. That was what surprised me, because you always knew Leonard fought for the cast, but to actually
and that was
turn down money and walk away, that was big.
And that comes down to, when you look at it, pretty much NBC was making that decision because of money. Filmation has been very much a company that wanted diversity. I mean, obviously, look at Fat Albert. They had the first black animated female superhero on television. I can't remember what it's called. They went through 3 different versions of the show, but in the later 70s. So, if you watch their live action shows, they had a multiracial cast. That was a big thing for them. In fact, and they, even when all of this is just Filmation history, when all the shows started going overseas, they're like, we want to help we like our employees, and they are an important part of our family. So they kept, one of the reasons Filmation probably isn't around is they kept it in America, and it was more expensive, but it was the people that mattered to them. So I think that was, and they definitely would have had Nichelle and George if they had not. If the money wasn't an object or whatever to begin with, that never would have been a conversation for them.
And that's probably my biggest disappointment of the show, was that Walter understood that, okay, there's just too many characters, I'm not going to be in any of the episodes, but let me write him into my episode. They probably wouldn't have had to pay him any more. They drew other characters. I mean, heck, they drew David Gerald. They drew the art staff. So you can't tell me they couldn't have drawn
those. David had
but
lines. Just but to be fair for that, the art staff was literally just still transporting, and if you're talking about I know. So if you're doing the characters, that does take a little bit more time. But no, they have enough macros of every other part of that. Was one of the things that Filmation was kind of pioneering for. The equivalent of what a computer macro today would be okay, this is the feet walking mode or whatever, and you just type it in. They had set so what people complain about being reused animation, it technically is, but it allowed them to actually pump out shows at a much faster rate than if they had to animate everything individually every time. So, but yeah, they could have just put Sulu or Chekhov's head on somebody other body.
I thought the way that it was done, they were able to show a certain quantity of layers on the screen at any one time, basically, which is why you get things like the top of the Lamachia or
the neck
Sayla disappearing.
Yeah.
I always loved the natural
I forgot about that,
arm changing colors. Uniform changes colors in Lore Life. I don't know how that happened. Went from I think blue to red, right? And then it was
somebody cosplayed that at Star Trek Las Vegas one year. She had
awesome.
The regular uniform with just the red sleeve. Or I think it was this side. I don't know. But yeah, no, the bloopers are, and that's something we actually called out in the book, because at first people were just like, "Oh, don't call out the mistakes." I'm like, they're mistakes ish. I mean, some of them are not necessarily mistakes. They're just they're like you said, there is a limit of layers that they could use, and so there are certain things that had to be sacrificed. They said if you watched Fat Albert with a lot of the big school scenes where there are a bunch of kids moving around doing stuff, there are times when it's their legs that you don't really pay attention to that are below the desk or whatever will vanish because there are only so many things that they can make move at one time. So I think it was kind of, to me, that was interesting to call out, and I think doing that was a good choice.
Well, and remember 1975 television sets, how big were they? You know what I mean? What was the it wasn't like HD. So it was it was very forgiving in situations like that. You might not have even realized it watching it back then.
And you watch the new HD transfer, you can see dust and fingerprints and all sorts of things that you never would have seen on television back then.
Yeah. But I was thinking, like, what you're calling, like, bloopers, I was thinking to a certain degree, I think they're sort of, can be seen as, like, nostalgic, in a way.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Potentially.
Yeah.
We've had a comment about, like, basically, like, if you were asked, well, he's saying that you should be asked, but if you were asked to write a book about Lower Decks, like, would you be up for that?
Oh, yes.
Flattered.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, completely flattered, obviously. You know, that's obviously, you know, I guess we could pitch one if we wanted to, but, you know, right now.
We have to wait for the series to be over first, and then we can.
Yeah. And I don't think with that show, I don't think there's that desire to absorb it every moment. Plus, there's so many websites out there. You would really need to be able to dig into it afterwards. I mean, that's the one thing that was the beauty about the animated series. A lot of the information out there was urban legends that we were able to you know, put to rest. You know, Lower Decks, I mean, how many websites, fan sites are out there that they're just, you know, and how many people are getting interviewed now. But yeah, I think Aaron and I would partner up again to do that book if Mike and John said, yeah, we want you guys to make the Lower Decks book. I mean, if we're going to become the Star Trek animated guys, I'm okay with that.
Well, if the internal company is keeping it from, I'm assuming they're keeping all of this information. But if they want somebody to be objective, they need somebody from the outside. So that's why they need us. You know?
Exactly. You know, I mean, we're fans, we're professionals. I mean, that's the difference. You know, like, and even when we get caught up in that. And that's why I love collaborating with Aaron. We were in a nice balance, and then throwing Lori into the mix because we were able to get 3 different ideas to say, okay, are we being fans or are we being objective?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely really like the book I've written. There's a note. It's an absolutely great book because I totally believe it is.
Thanks, man.
We've received that as a comment as well.
Oh yeah, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
That book doesn't work if it's not for Aaron. I said that. I've said that, and I'll continue to say that. And I'll say it till I'm an old man and I'm dying, and I'm like, look at this book we made. I'm like, you know, I did this little thing, but Aaron did. This was all Aaron. You know, honestly, it doesn't work without the visuals. And actually, Aaron and I talked about the fact that if CBS didn't want the book, what did we want to do? Did we want to do an unlicensed book? Did we want to just – because originally we thought we were going to dive into a lot of different things. But we both understood that it doesn't work without the images. It's an animation book.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's not successful without having access to all that. In order to license it from CBS and pay for it, there's no way.
I think there are stories that we could have told that are like, you know, what it was I think somebody had said it, like, it's not 60 minutes, we're doing an episode guide. So basically there are stories that we found where, like, there was a person who tried to put newspaper articles out to stop the animated series from coming out because it wasn't real Trek, which is a great story for today. But it kind of didn't go with the vibe of everything else. So we were trying to keep it as positive as possible. And like, here's all the interesting things, because there's enough of that already to put into, and then negative stories, I feel like we're overloaded with that right now already. So
yeah, and it really it's not Star Trek, especially that era. You know, I mean, today I guess it's a different lens, but yeah, back then. Plus, the book wasn't that big, you know, so it's like you can put everything in.
Right.
But if it wasn't,
if it was bigger, we would have put more of the encyclopedia section and got more detail.
Yeah, we would have built that,
like the ships and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's perfect length, though, at the end of the day, for what it is. And if you see a lot of these books that come out now, it's mostly just photos with very little copy. Again, they let us make the book we wanted to make, which is just mind-blowing.
I think it's a really good balance, because it's like there's a lot of visuals, but there's also enough content that you're not just like, okay, there's a picture, there's a picture, there's a picture. Like, I'm done.
I have a good friend from high school that the best compliment I received about the book was, you know, I appreciate it. He bought the book because I wrote it. He never watched the animated series, and he had it on the coffee table, and his daughter saw it, and she would watch an episode on Netflix and then read about it. And that to me, like, that was what I wanted to hear people do. Yeah, so she would go back, you know, watch the episode, then read about it, watch the episode and read about it. I can't wait to get to see her one day and sign the copy for her. That was like to me the best compliment. Yeah, that was like, all right, that's cool. That's what I was hoping to hear. So that was it.
I think one of my funniest compliments or favorite funny compliments was like, it feels more animated than the show did. Like, okay, great.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that was part of it. We really tried to make it feel like it had movement to it. That's one of the reasons, like the characters pop out of the frames and the borders and stuff like that, because we just wanted to give you the impression that it's like, okay, this is a fun cartoon. It's still serious Star Trek, but it's also, there's something fun to it. So.
Yeah, I think I put that in every episode. I tried to put something for the kids because it was still Saturday morning cartoon. It was still the Saturday morning landscape. Gene and Dorothy, you're writing Star Trek, which was great. Which I don't think we have this book in this conversation if they didn't do that.
Yeah.
But I mean,
if there wasn't a writer's strike, we would have this conversation.
It should be fun. It was Saturday morning cartoons. If you listen to Aaron's podcast, Saturday Morning Trek, I mean, it's the same thing. It should be fun, and that's what we tried to do. And I hope that you could see, and there's no doubt with the with the visuals, you could see how much fun we had making the book. Yeah, was it stressful? Sure. Did we learn it? I mean, I learned a lot about how to work with somebody. Very invaluable process. And it was a lot of fun.
So thank you very much for coming on the show to talk about.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say that new podcast actually just started populating yesterday. Drawn to Trek on Trek Geeks. It is a Star Trek animation podcast, so it's not just TAS. It's also Lower Decks and Prodigy eventually when it comes out. And there's a different host for each section. So for TAS, John Cooley is going to be joining me. For Lower Decks, Jesse Gender, and for Prodigy, Darren Moser, who was my co-host on Saturday Morning Trek, and we're going to get his kids' viewpoints on Prodigy, because it is even more so aimed at children than TAS was. So just wanted to throw that out. So that is the new podcast.
Oh, cool.
Which hopefully leads to a new book.
Yes, exactly. Maybe.
So, Rich, are you working on anything you'd like to promote some of the day?
At this point, no. I mean, I've got actually, Lori and I have got a pitch that we're wrapping up that we're going to throw out there. So, John, we're going to be sending you something hopefully very soon. And then I actually found another passion project. It's still too early that I'm going to pursue. I'm very excited about it, and I'm actually prepared to go self-publishing route if I need to. That's how excited I am about this idea. I know it's marketable. I just don't know if you can get a publisher to want to publish it. But yeah, so I mean, it's too early. Check out my Twitter feed. Rich would be me. I'm definitely have some things up, and check out Aaron's, because as I retweet everything Aaron does, Aaron will retweet everything I do, which I appreciate. But thank you for asking. I appreciate that. Yeah.
You're welcome. And I'll stick a link to both of your Twitter feeds in the description box for this video, and
thank you.
Probably a link to the book on the Amazon. And to your viewers, please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Scotch Tracker. Track you later.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.